Why, Wyatt, I am rolling. You know what that's from?
No,
It's from Tombstone.
I haven't seen Tombstone.
Oh, what the fuck are you doing?
I want to see it.
It's like my favorite Western.
It's on the list.
All right. So we just finished watching episode 6 of WandaVision, and we have a lot of thoughts and a lot to unpack. So I think the first big thing everybody saw was the resurrection / kidnapping of an adjacent reality's Quicksilver to take the place of Wanda's Quicksilver, who died in Age of Ultron. This confirms that Wanda has the ability to reach into alternate realities and make adjustments, even pluck things from alternate realities to bring them here. What that means going forward, your guess is as good as mine, but I definitely think we're in uncharted territory here. So one of the things we might see at some point in WandaVision is, at first I thought it was kind of a throwaway line, but then they revisited it in episode 6, is Monica Rambeau's character mentions that she has a friend who's an aerospace engineer. She calls somebody on the cell phone. And then in episode 6, we see they're going to meet that person. That identity of that person is unknown. We don't know who it is. Speculation could be all over the place who this person is, but it could be and would be amazing if this was Reed Richards. I was taken aback by Quicksilver from the Fox movie showing up in the MCU so quickly. To see ramifications from Disney buying that property was like startling. And I think they might be fast tracking stuff. And I think we might be on the verge of them starting to introduce the Fantastic Four. Reed Richards in the comics is famously a scientist of like everything. He could be the aerospace engineer. It could be anybody. It could be nobody. The fact that it's been hinted at twice, it's too good an opportunity for it not to be somebody. So I'd be shocked if it wasn't Reed Richards. One of the things I'm most excited for in the show, and I'm actually able to follow, is the character of Monica Rambeau. There's a couple cool things they've been doing with her. The first, right off the bat, they call her Captain Monica Rambeau. Obviously her designation from her time at S.W.O.R.D. But in the comics, she's the first female Captain Marvel. She was a character created essentially to hold on to the copyright for the name Captain Marvel. It's a whole thing we can get into in another video. So what's really cool in this show is we see her go through the barrier twice. She enters the barrier willingly, and then she's expelled from the hex by Wanda, passing through the barrier a second time. And when they do some science-y scans of her, I guess the results come back inconclusive or negative. This is probably an indication, and I'd bet the farm on it, that Monica now has superpowers. In the comics, she's probably one of the most powerful characters in Marvel. She has the ability to shift her person into different wavelengths of the energy spectrum. Her mother's call sign, Photon, is one of the names she takes in the comics after she stops calling herself Captain Marvel. And so I do think this is a very heavy-handed indication that this character now has superpowers in her own right and will hopefully become a superpowered character either by the end of this show or in some future project down the line, perhaps in the next Captain Marvel movie. So probably the longest lasting consequence we're seeing so far from the show is in the introduction of Wiccan and Speed. Those kids were born and then aged, and then had superpowers in 2 episodes. Probably by the end of this series, they'll be closer to teenagers, and we'll kind of see them they will appear in whatever future movie or TV show they end up in down the line. Presumably a Young Avengers property is in the works. We probably have to do a whole episode about this because it's super complicated, but very briefly in the comics, Wanda creates the children because she wants to have children with the Vision, and he's an artificial being. He can't create life, so she magics them into existence. What she did in the comics unknowingly was she hijacked the souls of Mephisto, who's kind of like a lower demon in hell. He's not the devil, but he's a devil allegory. So it's helpful to think of him as like a devil character. He makes bargains with different heroes and villains, and he bequeaths superpowers occasionally, takes them back. But the twins were, in the comics, 2 parts of Mephisto's soul that had been scattered throughout the world. And Wanda snatched those souls up and then put them in the babies so that they could have life and could be actual people. It's certainly possible that that's something coming down the line, but that comic book ended with a supervillain, Master Pandemonium, who had the babies on the ends of his arms as like little hands. It's horrifying. So I think that's a bit much for mainstream audiences to swallow. I don't know if we're going to go the whole Mephisto route. I don't think so, but it's certainly a possibility. They're not going to delve too much into those twins' origins because it's kind of a mess. There's 3 episodes left. Anything at this point, I think, is fair game. At the end of this most recent episode, episode 6, we see that Wanda not only just shut down everything going on inside the Hex, but she's expanded the Hex. So the perimeter of the area she's controlling has grown rapidly. At this point, I'd be surprised if this isn't an Avengers level threat. At the very least, Doctor Strange or somebody is probably going to show up. This is way beyond the conventional military's ability to handle what's going on inside the Hex. And at this point, some MCU character that's pre-existing in the MCU that we've already met before showing up like a major superhero like Doctor Strange to either shut this down or at least lend a hand to try to solve what's going on. He's the most logical choice. The reason I keep focusing on Doctor Strange is Wanda's been confirmed to be in the sequel to Doctor Strange that's coming out in 2 years. And I think there's rumors that she's now going to appear in the Spider-Man movie as well. This is the first part of like a loose trilogy they were talking about that's going to continue in the Spider-Man movie and end in Doctor Strange. It looks like Wanda is setting up the threat or the problem that's going to lead to multiple Spider-Man showing up in the Spider-Man movie and culminating in the Doctor Strange movie where he's going to have to kind of Sorcerer Supreme everything back to normal-ish. So a nice nod to the comics is they're starting to call the area that Wanda's controlling in Westview a hex. They mention it's because of the shape of, it's an hexagon shape, but in the comics, that's what her powers are always referred to as hex magic or hexing. She'd point her finger and they call it a hex. Another thing that they did in, I believe, episode 5 is they really drive home the point that Wanda Maximoff has never had a code name. They've never called her the Scarlet Witch. She's never had any other kind of nickname. They've only ever called her Wanda Maximoff or Wanda. So it might be something we might be getting. She wears her comic book costume in the most recent episode. We might be seeing them put the pieces together to just lean totally into the comics, call her Scarlet Witch, making that change going forward for the series in total. One of the other things we saw, this was in, I believe, episode 5, we see Wanda storm a sword facility to grab the damaged remains of the Vision. This is lifted directly from the comics. John Byrne did a series in West Coast Avengers in the 80s where basically every world government gets together and dismantles the Vision because he hijacked every nuclear weapon in the world, but that's like a whole other thing. They dismantled him, rendered him powerless, and wiped his memory so he couldn't do this again. She storms that facility and did the same thing. They grab the Vision, they take him, and they reactivate him, and he has no memory. Very much like in the show, Vision has no memory of his life prior to coming to this town. He doesn't even know what an Avenger is. So he knows he has powers, he knows Wanda has powers, and they have an agreement to conceal them until they don't, but he doesn't seem to have any idea of how he got here or, what his life was like before this. One of the few things I think we haven't seen from the trailers, again, the trailers lie to us and they've been lying to us since at least Iron Man 3. One thing we did see in the trailers was there's a shot of Wanda outside and she's in like sweatpants. It looks like a more modern day and she takes off and she's flying off a street. And there's a line that she says like, "This is our home, we're gonna fight for it." This might be them finding out that maybe Sword's pulling the strings. This might be a plot. The Sword director guy, I can't remember the guy's name. He's like a overly aggressive and he's tracking the Vision inside the Hex sphere. It's possible Sword is trying to weaponize the Vision because he's essentially as powerful as Thor. Sword might be looking for a way to manipulate the Vision and get him and to be a weapon that they can use for, planetary defense, essentially. So if you like this content and want to see more like it, feel free to subscribe below. If you want to follow me over on social media, you can find me on Instagram at @TheBraveButterPecan. If you're looking for more content like this, I co-host a weekly podcast called Caffeinated Comics. You can find anywhere you find your podcasts. If you're interested in any of the titles we've mentioned during this episode, I'd encourage you to support your local comic book store. If you don't know where your local comic book store is, you can go to comicshoplocator.com, type in your zip code, and they'll show you the nearest store.